Apple II forever, making life better and better. Apple II forever and ever, bringing the rainbow to you.
Welcome to my talk. My name is Micah Cowan. This mini-talk is about Taki, the text animation kit, an engine for creating animated text that will continue to run even while your program is actively accepting keyboard input. You can find out about my other projects in the links on this page. My links and contact info will be shown again at the end of the talk. Here's an obligatory fun splash screen running in Taki. Kinda neat, right? And it will play even as you're typing input. Heck, I can even exit the program and list its code, write a different program while it's playing, run that program, whatever. None of that is actually features per se. I can't see much actual benefit to this. It's just a consequence of how Taki is implemented. And actually, by default, Taki will exit when your program does. I've just disabled that for funsies here. Alright, so the motivation for writing Taki is that the very first big project I wanted to create for the Apple II when I got really into it was to make a killer text adventure. But I didn't want to make just any text adventure, I wanted to make something special and unique. And I had the idea in mind to make a text adventure that has maybe just a bit of twinkle and flash in the text descriptions themselves, something to make it just a wee bit more interactive of an experience than the usual text adventure. And that idea of twinkle and flash, that needed an engine to be built that was capable of handling stupid little animations, and ideally keep them playing even when the game's user is typing in their next directives, which, as you've already seen, Taki can do that, and more. So here's a demonstration of an example scene from this hypothetical adventure game that Taki is meant to support. And we've added kind of a quirky little touch, where a couple of the words in a phrase describing annoyingly sputtering fluorescent lights are themselves constantly sputtering on and off. And there's something sitting on a table, but we can't really tell what it is because the word is a bit slippery? Maybe we're not totally sure it's even a word. Now, I happen to have inside information that it might be something like, say, a magically cursed stapler, but I can't seem to get a hold of the object to place in my inventory. Maybe I need to find some way of undoing the curse before I can successfully obtain it. Guess we'll move on then. Whoops, guess I have to open the door first. And maybe now we can leave. Okay, so yeah, maybe some of this is a bit too gimmicky. Certainly the door thing was maybe a bit too much. Now that I've written most of the engine, I'm struggling to come up with writing ideas for a proper adventure game that doesn't wind up being a big ball of cheese. Or maybe a big ball of cheese is exactly what I need to write for this, and then I can move on and write a more serious adventure, I don't know. But this is the road I've set myself on, apparently. There are only a few explicit design goals for Taki. The first was that Taki must be usable from BASIC, but also usable from machine language programs, perhaps without BASIC having to be loaded. With this requirement in mind, Taki interfaces with the calling program by hooking the monitor's standard input and output routines, and the developer can issue commands by printing them out and prefacing them with a special control character, just like you do with DOS commands in BASIC, except that Taki's character is recognized anywhere in the line, and not only after a carriage return, because Taki often needs to be enabled for a word or two in the middle of a line. This also meant that describing the text to be animated could also be done using print statements, which is obviously a pretty natural facility to provide text with. For me personally, AppleSoft is a fundamental part of what I identify as Apple II-ness. Wherever I can make something that could maybe form a symbiotic relationship with AppleSoft, I like to do that. BASIC is perhaps not the ideal language for writing a text adventure in, so I don't want to actually require it. And yet, I think most people wanting to get their feet wet in designing and creating a text adventure game, they're going to use BASIC to do it. And I want people to be able to use Taki as a part of that experience too. Another design goal is that it should be able to run fast enough that an entire page of text can be updated in a single frame. I don't want the user to see ripple effect updating the way you do if you fill a screen of text in BASIC using print commands. An earlier version of Taki was built entirely around page swapping, but for the text pages, there turns out to be a number of complications to using that feature, including the fact that early Apple IIGSs actually don't do it in hardware at all, but emulate it in software. It also made reasoning about what Taki was doing more complicated than it should be. And if you're determined, you can get screaming fast text, writing a whole page in better than 60 frames per second, at least if you're willing to compile the text to be drawn directly into a series of load and store operations. So I got rid of the page flipping and made Taki's code significantly saner. It's intended that Taki run properly on all models of Apple II, from the 2 Plus, or an original was 64K, to the Apple II GS and 2C Plus. In fact, the reason all of my demonstrations are in capital letters, as you may have noticed, is that I've been primarily doing my development on an emulated Apple II Plus. This has bitten me a couple of times, but it helps me ensure that the code I write is compatible with the oldest models. Taki can handle lowercase text totally fine, by the way. I'm just not using any in my examples. Finally, I want users to be able to pick and choose which effects are loaded in memory and available to their program, and potentially swap them in and out. I also want assembly-capable users to be able to create their own effects for use with Taki. Now, neither of these goals are currently supported in Taki, but it will be straightforward to add later on. I also have ideas on putting effect design in reach of even those users who don't know a lick of assembly. Alright, so let's talk about what using Taki looks like from within a BASIC program. Taki can also easily be used from machine language programs, of course, but supporting use from BASIC was an explicit goal, and for the purposes of this talk, BASIC also makes for easier demonstrations of how to use Taki. First off, you call Taki's initialization routine. Then you probably want to set up a couple of string variables to hold the special characters that Taki recognizes. And then you're ready to start using effects. So in this example, you can see we print some text to the screen, then we print out tstring, the variable that holds our magic control character, control T, followed by a command that Taki recognizes, word. The word command tells Taki that it should apply the effect we're specifying, which in this case is called scan, to the next word that follows this command. The Taki command ends when it sees a carriage return, so a full print without a semicolon is appropriate. Taki will eat the carriage return, so the text cursor is still right where it was before we sent the special character in tstring when we send it the word. And then when Taki sees a space from print, or a carriage return, it stops sending the text to the effect handler and goes back to just sending things directly to the screen. Another way to tell Taki how much following text to send to an effect for processing is with the mark command. This tells Taki to keep slurping text until it sees a special character, a different one, control Q, that we placed in Q string. That makes it easier to send as much text as we want to the effect. The bounce in ping pong lounge example we saw earlier, we just sent everything in, and then ended with a control Q right before we started animating. Also, something we didn't show earlier, but you can follow an effect name with some parameters in parentheses to modify behavior. In this case, we'll tweak the speed for this effect and introduce a little extra delay between each animation frame. So you can see that this animation is running significantly slower than the first one. Every effect can take the F delay parameter. Some also have other available parameters. Animations kick on the first time somebody prompts for input, but you can also kick them on yourselves with a pause instead. You really can't use a for loop or the monitor's wait command to pause in your program while animations are running, because this hogs all the CPU time and allows no opportunity for the animations to actually run. So Taki offers a delay command to pause a while the animations run. It's not really possible to say how big a number you should give the delay command because it depends on how much processing time is required by whatever effects are currently running. But somewhere around 170-ish might be about right for a second, and you can try that out and then adjust the value as needed. Finally, Taki has a config command that you can use after an effect has already been instantiated to tweak parameter settings after the fact. We'll modify the speed of our second scanner effect, and also introduce a brief pause at the end of each animation cycle before it repeats. So when I press return, you can see that take place. The bottom animation is suddenly faster, and has a break between animation cycles. Taki also has some built-in debugging aids that are optionally enabled for non-production cases, to make it easier to notice if you've mistyped a Taki command, or if some other kind of error has occurred. I was going to include details about that in this talk, but there wasn't enough time. Just know that it's there. So what else could Taki potentially be made to do? A gimmicky text adventure isn't the only thing you could potentially use Taki for. It possibly works even better for just adding a bit of pizzazz to your basic games in general. You could do animations of this sort for more action arcade type games in BASIC. And of course, since text and low-res graphics are really the same thing in memory, there's actually a lot of potential here. You could maybe even write Taki effects that handle collision detection and automatic sprite movement. By the way, this example uses one more Taki command we didn't cover in the earlier overview, the instant command. The animated effect used in this demo doesn't need to capture any text to be animated because it already knows what characters it will want to send without any further input. So Taki provides an instant command used the same way as the word or mark commands, except that nothing printed after that point is captured and sent to the effect. Following text is immediately sent directly to the screen. Since Taki has complete control over the input routine, we could time it out. If the user doesn't hit a key in X amount of time, Taki returns something anyway. Maybe a special character the program knows to look for, I don't know. But this would make it easier to write action-oriented games in BASIC, with animated characters like this derpy Pac-Man knockoff character, and baddies that move around every half second, so you'd better choose your next move quickly. None of that is a direction I'm looking to take Taki's development at this time, but it's possible I could decide to generalize it further and build multiple other types of kits with it. Alright, I'm going to briefly go over some of Taki's current limitations. First of all, if printed text reaches the bottom of the screen and it starts to scroll, that won't work with the animations. They don't know they were supposed to scroll. I do actually have some ideas on handling this very nicely, but they would require some reworking of Taki's existing design. Another problem is that currently there is zero documentation on Taki or how to create effects for it. If it turns out that there's a fair amount of interest in using Taki, I'll spend some time fixing this situation sooner. Otherwise, I'll probably consider focusing my time and energy either on implementing a flexible position animation system, or more likely on trying to write a proper adventure game that uses Taki more or less as it is now. There is no 80 column support, and there probably won't be. The things Taki does are significantly more difficult to do as smoothly in 80 columns. The bounce-in effect, for instance, is liable to be quite a bit trickier in 80 columns. Most Taki effects write their text by setting screen memory directly, and do not use the standard output routine because it would be far too slow. Some of them effectively compile the collected text directly into a series of load A and store A machine code instructions it will use during the animation to keep the time spent to an absolute minimum. So this means that if I'm going to support both 40 columns and also 80 columns, and remember that a design goal is to support all Apple II models, including those with no 80 column support, then I have to write every effect, or at least many of them, twice, once for 40 column and once for 80, because the instructions the effect may have to compile would be very different between those two modes. Another issue is the cursor character. You may have noticed that it's the old school cursor from the original Apple II and Apple II Plus. But the cursor currently looks that way on an Apple IIe or later as well. No matter what Apple model you're using Taki in, that's the cursor you get while Taki is running. Why? Well, the original Apple II just uses flashing characters for the cursor, which rely on a hardware timer that stays very consistent, while the IIe and later models use software timing to show and hide a non-flashing character. The problem is that if animations are running, they will necessarily slow the cursor flash down. If it's done in software, the effect would be pretty janky. So we either need to use a flashing character like the original models, or else we need to use a static character, such as maybe an underscore, that doesn't flash. Actually, I probably will go that route or something similar in future versions of Taki. The reason Apple IIe and later stopped using the hardware-based flashing text characters is that they introduced lowercase characters but didn't support flashing versions. So there stopped being a way to do the cursor correctly when it's sitting atop a lowercase character, which is in fact an issue that Taki now also suffers. Current builds of Taki demand an outrageous amount of memory, far more than it currently actually needs. Taki isn't currently relocatable, and I'm building it with plenty of room to grow as I continue to develop it. but I will work on making it play nicer before I make a proper 1.0 release. Well, that's all the time we have for this brief mini-talk. Thanks for your time and interest, and let me know what you think. I plan to post further updates on this and other projects on my Mastodon account, shown here. Thanks very much.